the golden opportunity. Speaking as a vampire, what do you make of the book's technical merits?
It made me sad.
Why sad?
Because Dracula had no servants.
I think you missed the point of the book, Count Orlok.
Have you seen that? The Shadow of the Vampire?
I haven't. Although it sounds very familiar. When did that come out? It's very recent.
2000.
That feels recent to me.
Featuring Willem Dafoe as Max Schreck.
God, yeah.
And and you got Malkovich playing Murnau, and I saw it. I got it from Blockbuster way back in the day, but I hadn't seen any Nosferatu movies at the time, so I remember being very lost. And
so
then
you didn't get a lot of the context there.
No.
What was going on?
No. But I did at least like introduce me to this idea that the guy who played the original Nosferatu, there's legends and who knows what is invented versus actual, but the whole 2000 film Shadow of the Vampire was predicated on this idea that Max Schreck got so into character that he started believing that he was a vampire.
I love it. True method. But I think the producer of the original Nosferatu was really into the occult.
Right.
That's one of the reasons why it got made. So who knows?
Right. I think the film is kind of like, composites both of them into that character. But yeah,
folks, we're back.
We're back.
This Film Trace. What season? It's like chapter 9 of the volumes, but I think it's like it's technically season 14.
Yeah. Sub-volume 22.
Sub-volume 22. We are back with Film Trace, the podcast where we trace the life of a film from production. See, I've already lost it. It's conception to production, all the way to release and reception. We're going to be rusty this first episode. I can feel it. We are doing Visionary Remakes is the theme of this season. And so we'll go through each decade, starting with the 2020s. We'll talk about Nosferatu, Robert Eggers' 2024 release, and then obviously the original from 1922, and then 2010s, 2000s, we'll do Dawn of the Dead, 1990s, we'll do Cape Fear. The goals, we'll talk about the remake from that year, and then we'll also talk about the original film, which came out prior to it. Nosferatu is a good one, though, because it's been about 100 years. So it is a long stretch of time to go from, obviously other versions have been made, but it's had a long gestation cycle in terms of film history. So I think it's a very good one to start out with here. And we both love Robert Eggers, right? Is that fair?
I don't know. I don't know anymore.
Oh, come on, The Witch.
Yeah, I mean, so we should probably get our baggage out of the way.
Yeah,
first.
we got to get the baggage out of the way.
Because, so here's where I stand. I really like The Witch. I love The Lighthouse. I think The Northman's okay.
Okay.
And this new one, I just, no thank you.
Wow, just really didn't love it at all.
No. It's like a tick above.
That's very surprising because I feel like we were both super stoked for this movie.
I was so stoked, but I also have Dracula baggage as well.
What's your Dracula baggage?
Well, I taught it for 5 years as an English teacher, and I got way deep. And when I did that, I saw the original Nosferatu. I saw the Shadow of the Vampire again, this time with context, and obviously the Bela Lugosi film, and I had a very kind of 180 reappraisal of Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula, because it helped me see it in a new light. We were also like reappraising Keanu as an actor around that time too.
Totally.
And yeah, I coming into this, I really thought, I didn't love The Northman, but I really thought that it had like a very distinct voice and presence to it that previous hadn't really seen or hadn't seen in a while in terms of like action adventure movies, especially period style action adventure films. It felt in some ways like what Ridley Scott tries to do with the Gladiator movies. I haven't seen the second one yet, but I was never really a fan of the first one, despite all its acclaim, and yet I was really kind of hoping that that kind of imagination would be more present, more in your face, just like more interesting with with this new version of it. And like the most interesting thing we got was immortal dong and a mustache. So
Immortal dong, amazing. It was so funny because I watched it and like I had read a lot about it before I've seen it. And with Eggers movies, he's so like in the details, especially about historical detail.
Right.
There's that infamous New Yorker profile that came out about him before The Northman comes out, and it's just like you read this thing, you're like, this guy's clearly bonkers. Like he has some sort of obsession with replicating the past or being quote unquote authentic. In that case, it was like the boats that they were using in the Northland, they had to be like made with the tools that were available back then with the Vikings. And so I read a lot about this movie, and like that came up like the prosthetic dong and like the mustache. And as I was watching, it was like I hardly even noticed those things. Yeah. Like that's like the least thing that I noticed about this movie. I mean, it's my relationship with him in terms of like being a viewer or whatever. I adore his work, but I'm extremely harsh because it's like The Witch is probably, and I think I said this on a text thread, probably in my top 10 of the 2000s. From 2000 till now, it's probably in my top 10 films. I think it's like one of the best horror films ever made. I think his obsession with historical accuracy really, really shines in his debut. And there's just something wonderful about his filmmaking that feels almost magical. And then The Lighthouse comes out, and I can't stand it. Now I literally almost walked out. And I was obviously super excited about it when I went to go see it in the theater, and it just never clicked for me. Not a single scene.
Was that I'm wondering if that was an expectations thing, because you saw it when it came out. I saw it after like it was on digital, and I had heard a lot about it, and I went into it knowing that it was going to be a really like 90-degree departure from what he was doing with The Witch.
Yeah, I mean, I was up for the ride. Like after The Witch, he's obviously so committed to his vision that he's going to go wherever it takes him. So I expected something pretty weird and odd. I just and I had a similar experience with Nosferatu in the sense that I loved the visuals. I loved the production design. I loved so many of the choices that he made. But for me, the story, ironically, and I had just watched the original like 2 days prior, the story just wasn't there. It just wasn't. It was one of those problems where I think he tried to play it too close to the original, that it felt pretty boring. It was almost like what I know these plot points, I know these beats. There was a lot of different and new choices and stuff that he added, but it wasn't really enough to make it a compelling movie to me.
Right.
And I think that's like, and that's going to go to the heart of kind of what we're talking about this season is, when you decide to remake a movie, what are you bringing to it? You have the baggage of the original. What are you going to bring that's new? And there's great examples of it going well, like something like The Thing from 1982. That was obviously a remake, and the 1982 remake is a masterpiece. But there's other, Nosferatu might be an example where it kind of seems like an afterthought. And I don't know, I don't know how you want to start diving into it, but I think that what about this 2024 version for you, kind of immediately stood out to you as sort of like, oh, this isn't really working?
Yeah, it was, it stands out like a sore thumb. It was like my main hesitation going into it, but I ultimately think so much he hangs so much of the movie on Ellen as the protagonist, which is the Mina Harker character, who's definitely not a protagonist in any sense in any former version of this story.
Yeah.
And not only does he hang it on that character, which is a departure in a movie that, like you said, has so little going on in it that there's not really story. There's character, perhaps, but then he's also trying to put it on the shoulders of Lily Rose Depp, who I think is like so out of her depth. And I know that it seems like the takes on this are polarizing. A lot of people think that she's like, it's phenomenal in like all her convulsions and just like melodramatic giving it her all, but to me it all seems so like thin and manufactured, and not in a way that makes me like feel for her in any way. And I don't think that she's compelling on screen at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like I can see it both ways because I've read all the takes on this, whether it be on like film blogs or whatever, or like gossip subreddits. Like it's all over the place on what people think about this performance. I tend to think I kind of give her a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, just because Eggers is, in terms of casting, is so specific. He's a perfectionist across the board, and she was not in any way. She had to go through the gauntlet to get this part. And like, there's some interview where it goes into her audition, and she basically goes batshit crazy in it, which is kind of what the character is at the end of the day. So I don't know. On my take on her performance is that she did very, very well with what she was giving and what she was told to do. The problem is, and I think you hit the bullseye there, making her the protagonist doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
it certainly doesn't make any sense to the original take whatsoever. It also, in a weird way, I think Richard Brody talks about this in his review, which he really slams the movie.
Yeah, that's my guy. That's my guy.
Yeah, I mean, I read that last night. I was like, like, I get what he's saying. He's pretty vitriolic about it, I would say, his viewpoint. But yeah, he's hanging a lot on this character. I think the character itself is thin. I don't think Depp is out of her depth. I do think that she certainly swings for the fences, and she puts on a really fascinating performance. But I just don't think there was anything there to work with in terms of character. There's a lot of emoting. There's a lot of acting. Right. There's just not a lot of emotional narrative there, because essentially her fate is sealed from the first scene.
Right. Yeah.
Right. It's like the whatever you want to call it, I guess it's rape, happens then. And then it's basically just playing out the recombination of that initial act, or the revenge of that initial, the cycle of that initial act. So I think that's another part too, where it's sort of like, what is really going on here with this, like this story? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And he's given innumerable interviews about where he wanted, like, where the genesis of this movie was, because he's saw it as a little kid, the original 22 film, and he's been gestating this specific vision for a remake for over a decade. And I mean, I can't help but like Occam's razor, the most obvious explanation is the correct one, that like it's been too much. Like classically like just obsessed about. There's an interview with the American Society of Cinematographers where he talks about like the buttons and how fixated he was on choosing what buttons to you at some point you lose the forest for the trees. And it just seems so painfully clear that like any kinds of moments of like awe or beauty in this movie, or just like where like I had some kind of visceral reaction, which was pretty minor, to be honest, throughout much of the runtime. But like they did happen in spurts because it is still Eggers. Like he has like an eye for this stuff.
Yeah.
The choice to do the boxier aspect ratio, I think, was an interesting one. The choice to have this kind of like, you know, absolutely disgusting, vile rendition after so many years of, you know, sexy vampires is kind of a refreshing one. But you actually have to like you have to put meat on the bones with that, like you were saying, like there is such a thing as too much acting. Like you almost feels like there's acting in place of actual like building of character. He talks about this Ellen character in a way where I'm just like, I wish I would have seen that on screen, but it's just like isn't there. There's like one scene that I thought was like vaguely interesting dialogue wise, where she like kind of she's arguing with her husband, played by Nicholas Hoult, and trying to like get him to understand like these kinds of what it's like to go through these spells, and how she's being written off as hysterical. That feels kind of fresh, like in like a 2024 kind of like rendition of the whole, you know, old timey hysteria stuff. But that was it. Like that, I feel like that was like maybe one of the only scenes where I felt any kind of insight into her other than just this like possessed woman that, you know, everybody's like running around trying to figure out how to help. It's futile.
What's interesting is that, like, you know, if we go back to the original Nosferatu from 1922, I mean, like that movie was pretty slight in terms of story.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I had never seen it before. In watching it now, you know, it felt more entertaining than the current one. I mean, as someone who has taught that movie, you know, in film classes, you know, what is it about the original Nosferatu that, you know, is so enduring? What is it that keeps it in sort of the lexicon of film criticism?
Yeah, and that was definitely like very much on my the top of my mind when revisiting it, because I saw the remake and then I went back and did my 22 rewatch, and like that, it's loud and clear from the get-go how spare this thing is. And so I think the main there's two things that come to mind, or that came to mind while I was rewatching, and one is, you know, one of the things that you just like have to teach for like an intro high school film class is the use of light and shadow and chiaroscuro and German expressionism. And it's just like it's like literally invented in front of your eyes there. Like,
yeah, totally.
And when Eggers does like the shadowy figure on the wall thing, it feels rote. But like when you see it in its original form, it's just like it's magical. Like it still feels like a magic trick, like cinema did back then. And that is just like far and away where it's just like, you know, Eggers is so pinned down by these details and this formalism, which is a kind of loaded word that you brought up in our text thread that I want to hear about more.
Yeah.
But it very much felt like it wasn't a formal exercise. It was like, we are trying to like take this Dracula story, dodge the copyright, but essentially like we want to bring it to the screen. Like Murnau was a legitimate visionary in this era of filmmaking. And so by you know, it was that it's like this interesting thing where he's like kind of stuck in this legal loophole, but he uses it to his advantage by like turning, like literally, like it feels, I don't know, that's the other thing is like, as much as it's called Nosferatu, and as much as I think Eggers wants to like indebt himself more to the, you know, weird German expressionist style, like it very much still just, it feels like Dracula. It's just Dracula. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Whereas Nosferatu, the 22 version, it feels like its own thing. Like it's
it feels
Dracula.
Totally different. Well, I think that's a lot of it's the time though, because like Dracula had come out like 1897, I think it was released or published, and that's coming out in 1922. I mean, I guess that's enough time for it really to be infused in the public consciousness, the tropes of the novel. But you're right. I mean, Nosferatu, we attach it to Dracula, but it feels so distinct on so many different levels. And I think to loop back and relating it to sort of the modern one, as someone who had just seen it for the first time, the 1922 version, it's still creepy as hell.
Yeah.
Right. That film negative thing with the carriage and stuff. That's just crazy.
Oh, it's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like simple. Like it's not that. But right back then it was probably obviously like very experimental. But I think the thing about it for me is I was watching it, and it's one of the things that it points out in any sort of probably film textbook or film criticism or film history is like, oh, they're shooting on location, right?
Yep.
That was a big, huge change versus sort of like the studio work that was going on before. And when you watch the original Nosferatu, it doesn't, despite the acting feeling very kind of the time, like overwrought, it's a silent film. So like you have to convey a lot through
the pantomime.
Yeah, the pantomime. But I will say that it being shot on location in a variety of places, it adds to this level of, I don't know if authenticity is the right word, but it gives us this like almost like kinetic energy, where it feels, the story feels like it's infused with this sense of purpose and drive. And for some reason, it's very engaging, even though it's been, 103 years since it came out. And I do want to contrast that to the modern one, Eggers' version, which came out, on Christmas. In the sense, when I say formalism, I'm always coming back from like a literary theory background.
Yeah.
Right. Where it just seems as though Eggers doesn't sort of realize the power of the original and that kind of concept of there's a grittiness to it.
Yeah.
And a realism to it that he completely ignores.
Yeah. He has no interest in it.
He has no interest in it, which is bizarre because you go back to The Witch, and that felt really authentic and rooted in reality, just a past reality. The Northman, there's mythical elements in it, but a majority of the film, I'm thinking like the raid scene and all that sort of stuff feels very like a recreation of what possibly could have happened.
Yeah.
This one doesn't feel that way at all. This one feels like a snow globe world.
And I mean, even I know you're not a fan, but one of the things that draws me back to The Lighthouse is how like just disgusting the film is. Like it's just
the
like
farting, the everything.
Yeah, like it's just it puts you there in this really grimy, like fantastical, but absolutely gross setting. And like even in those shots of Orlok and Bill Skarsgård in his ridiculous prosthetics, it still feels like we're somewhere in like this like magical land. Like it's I don't know. I
mean, it doesn't feel. I think that's where he's going for that gothic romance viewpoint, which like the most recent film that comes to mind is Crimson Peak.
I was just going to bring that up.
2017 was that Guillermo del Toro did that? Yeah, which is a very interesting thing. I really enjoy that movie.
Me too.
It's not good, but I enjoy it.
It's not his best, but yeah.
No, it's a rather and it does that effect so well. Right. Obviously, you're in this story to storybook world where I think this modern Nosferatu falls short is that it's just not scary.
That's a huge part.
It's not scary. And it should be. The original is still kind of creepy as hell.
Oh my gosh.
You're
walking around in daylight with his coffin. Like
it's just in the way that he looks.
Right.
And so like Orlok in this current one, I don't know. It obviously a lot of thought and tons of production design went into it. Like you read any of the interviews related to this movie and everybody involved was super committed and really wanted to do something special. every single aspect and every single person on this movie was like that. It just doesn't have it though. Orlok's not scary. He just looks like your typical ghoul.
Right.
There's nothing that scary
with
about
a big
him.
flavor saver in the front.
Yeah, and it's like I don't know, like I feel like I'm trying to remember back to the Francis Ford Coppola Dracula. He scared me.
Oh yeah.
Like
Yeah. I also think we were at a very impressionable age, like seeing the promos
it changed
and
my
stuff.
life.
Gary Oldman. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's here's the other thing that like it was kind of one of my main gripes of like I was literally like so not entranced by this movie that I kept thinking like I need something to grab onto, and like one of the things I kept coming back to were the costumes and the sets, and it's just like this is also ornate and impressive on a technical level, but I don't feel like there's anything like this guy's it's supposed to be my weirdo. Like I heard that a weirdo was remaking Nosferatu, and so I knew I was going to see that shit like opening day if I could. And he like I don't know, he's just like he like is pulling back on the weirdness in so many respects, and uh, love or hate Coppola's version of it, but like that, he put his weirdo stamp on that, and like a lot of people didn't realize how much of a weirdo Coppola was until Dracula came out, right?
I mean, it was bonkers. Like I haven't seen it in a long time, but it has been seared into my mind. So many different scenes, specifically like the opening of him, Vlad the Impaler. What is it?
Impaler.
Yeah, that whole thing. I was like, in the outfit he was wearing, I was like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
And I never felt that once. The only thing I felt in this current version was, I think, Depp's performance. Like, that like a lot of people are not super keen on it, but there's moments in this where she really she seems really possessed. And that's the stuff that stood out to me in this current one. I was like, oh, that's interesting, and that's different, and that's new. You wouldn't have seen an actor do something like that. Or, I mean, what about the 1979 version?
Yeah,
I mean,
I thought that would be
talked about that a little bit, because I only seen parts of it. I think you've really watched it all the way through. Yeah.
So and it had been on my list forever, and I think one of the reasons I kind of avoided it was just because like I kind of have like this weird love-hate thing with Werner Herzog, the German auteur that remade it in 79, and like he's made incredible films, but also he's like every film has, before he became a documentarian, had some kind of like troubled production backstory where he was just like Germany also has like no film unions except for actors, so like and he went around that in movies like Fitzcarraldo by like going to shoot on location in Peru, and literally like because he didn't give a shit about other people, some people died on that production. There were definitely lots of complaints and definitely animal abuse on the production of Nosferatu the Vampire, which is the official title of the 79 one. But I was just like, I got to like I can't just keep dancing around this. And I was just very curious how it landed in the middle of these two. And I was not on board with it at first. I knew that another reason that I kind of stayed away from it for so long is that it has this notorious, like, it's very hard to get the German version. And there's two versions of it out there. And they literally like filmed every scene with dialogue twice, one in German and one in English. But like the English language one is the only one that's really available anywhere in the States. So I was like, this is going to be awkward. That was another part of the Eggers movie where it's just like, that always takes me out for a bit. It's like, the title card says Germany, and then it's like Nicholas Hoult speaking in like British English. Like,
what's that about? Why don't you just make it London, like the novel?
Exactly. The literal novel is
it makes no sense to make it in Germany. Yeah,
it's so bizarre. So yeah, it took me a little while. But like, it also has this really iconic opening of the Herzog version of the of mummies in Mexico City.
Yeah, I
So
saw
he's like,
this, and I was
he's
like, "What is going
literally
on here?"
shooting. Yeah, I know. I mean, the guy, that's another thing, is like Herzog's like a genuine weirdo, like kind of in a bad way, but like
Yeah,
at least he's got something, some kind of like bonkers aesthetic to him that matches in a way that I thought Eggers was going to match. And I really loved it by the end of it. I mean, he also has Klaus Kinski in the Nosferatu role. He's being called Dracula because at this point Dracula's in the public domain, so it very
Yep.
much plays with like the back and forth of Murnau. And I mean, Herzog, for all his faults, like he's an incredibly thoughtful filmmaker and just like really like deep and philosophical and profound at any chance he gets. And he's clearly, and he's had this like really mercurial relationship with his leading man, who he also directed in Agur, the Wrath of God, one of his most famous films, just a few years before Nosferatu. But like he's the guy. Like Bill Skarsgård is like a freaking ant compared to Klaus Kinski. Like this guy, and Herzog is all about like light and color, and he's like doing this in this like German brutalist way that's very antithetical to, you know, the light and shadows of German expressionism of the early part of the century.
Yeah.
But he's still doing on location, and so like everything looks like starkly real. And then you get into the castle, which is the same castle that Eggers used. And there's another thing that, like, you know, sometimes doing the research for this show kind of ruins things in a way that you probably wouldn't, like, because I dug, and it turns out that like Eggers consciously didn't watch Herzog's.
I read that in the notes, and that really blew my mind.
That even
makes
though he
no
used
sense.
the same castle.
But like, why would you do that if you're, you know, if you're remaking one of the most famous movies of all time,
right?
And you're a perfectionist,
which also had a remake that was also famous and begat a movie co-starring a guy that you're putting in your movie.
Yeah,
like,
it just seems like a really a rather bizarre choice to avoid exposing himself to that aspect of the discourse, because that's part of the discourse.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that like, you know, it's kind of, it's a little bit of a red flag in terms of what he was trying to accomplish here.
Right.
And it really speaks to this bigger question about why you're remaking this. Like,
exactly.
What's the purpose? What do you hope to get out of this, or what do you hope the audience to get out of this remake? And you know, what do you think Eggers was going for?
I mean, to me, it just reeks of like, this is the thing I wanted to do when I was a kid, and so I'm finally getting it out. The corollary that comes to mind is Edgar Wright making Baby Driver. Like that was his like 12-year-old pet project idea.
Can I just say ew to that movie? Ew.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reasons to say ew to that, you know, 10 years after it came out. But yeah, even just like, I mean, the one saving grace of that movie, kind of like Eggers has, you know, a saving grace or two in this movie, is like he's able to use that technical prowess, like like Edgar Wright's sound editing. He's like, oh, I can finally do this in a way that like will look really cool, but it's still just like a 12-year-old wet dream story cast of characters. Like it's a big nothing burger, but he like got to finally do it, and it's out there. And then, you know, he hopefully will one day start making good movies again. But
well,
maybe
it's funny because, you know, I when Nosferatu was announced that, you know, Eggers was going to remake it, I think he was working on it before The Northman was in the can and got released. The Northman famously flopped. Like, it was a kind of a financial disaster. Now there's stories that came out later that like, oh, they did okay. They didn't. Those are lies. Like, that's completely farcical. That movie lost tens of millions of dollars. It was a huge box office bomb. But Nosferatu had already set sail. And so I think that like I was blown away by the reception to this movie.
Yeah.
You know, they released it on Christmas, this last Christmas, and it is like, I don't even know where it's at now, but it is doing quite well. It's already at 156 million worldwide.
Yeah.
Like it took off. And the budget was only 100. It was only 50 million. So this thing's going to be in the black here, even before, the VOD numbers that come into play.
So Dan, are you ready for Robert Eggers' version of Last Night in Soho?
Oh, God. I forgot Edgar did that. What is he doing lately? Anyways, The Running
He's
Man.
He's remaking The Running Man.
Yeah, Running Man. I forgot. With Glenn Powell, right? I don't know. Yeah, here to me, like I feel like I think you're right. Where sometimes remakes are just they're dreams. Like it's like that. Remember those kids that remade Raiders of the Lost Ark? Remember this? Like it was
yeah, that's right.
And it's kind of like that. Like there were kids they wanted to remake it on like home videos, but like he's obviously grown up and has lots of money and clout. But it's still the same thing, but with a lot less magic than probably this kids in remaking Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? It just does not have not much spark to it whatsoever. Like, there's almost like this. He's lost in the details. He's lost in the type of buttons and the clothing and all the tiny minutia of production design, and he just didn't think about, hey, how can I make this a compelling story for 2024? 4 years into a pandemic, the entire movie's about a pandemic, right? It's almost, and that's one thing too that like in this new version. The original version, it's obviously there. Nosferatu means what? Like plague bearer in Romanian, I think. So it's a vital apspect of the story. But when he hangs the narrative hat on, Depp's character, he loses the plague part of it. He still has it in there, but it seems as like this superfluous just cream on the top. It's just not part of the actual narrative gut at all. And I think when he loses so much in making that choice, so much.
Yeah, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts after you watch Herzog's version all the way through, because that maybe even more so than the original 22 version. Like he hits that hard. Like that is, it's so much so that like seeing it in a post-COVID world is like, oh my God, like this guy like knew like it did what. And I started like researching, like, was there some kind of plague in Germany in the 70s? But like, no, it's just like he's that. I mean, every film he has the specter of death on it, and he knew that was central to Nosferatu, and it was obviously central to the original, more so than even the original Dracula was, because there was the new plague in the after the turn of the century, and not only that, you also had World War I.
Sure,
so, like between both of those, it's like Herzog's town has just like there's so people getting carted off, there's rats everywhere, there's like people like having their last dinner in the streets before they know that they're inevitably gonna pass, and that just feels so much more important and like celebratory of the original like text, that it's losing forest for the trees. Like Eggers isn't thinking about audiences at all. I don't think he's just thinking about his own, like he wrote a novella, right? just for himself before co-writing the script with the same person he co-wrote The Northman with. And it's just like it's a classic instance of just like lost in the sauce.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because The Northman is an incredibly simple story too.
Yeah.
It's very straightforward, on the nose, but I think it worked way more for me than for you. It's definitely one of my favorite movies of the last decade. But yeah, for some reason here, it's almost, what's interesting? Like if we had none of the baggage of, say, Dracula and Nosferatu and that kind of stuff, it wasn't in our head, and we just saw this movie, would probably be like, oh, like this is really fascinating. This is really interesting. Maybe not a great movie, but like within the context of film history and knowing all the Dracula movies and some of the Nosferatu movies, it just comes across as a copy of a copy of a copy with some cool smudges. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it just doesn't, you know, you can't get by. I don't know, which is so bizarre from a director like him, because he's so out there. He's so in his own world. He's so confident. He's so artistically confident that he didn't sit down. And this goes back to like, I will rant about this till the day I die on this podcast. But like the writing aspect of filmmaking is the most important, and nothing comes close. Like if you do not have a super interesting, you know, rich script that has been tuned and worked on like a clock, you're never going to have a great movie. And I think he just didn't do that here. He's going on vibes.
Right,
He's directing for Zoomers. It's vibes all the time.
So speaking of Zoomers, I get to talking with my students sometimes about modern.
What do they say?
Films. Well, I just had one conversation with this kid, and the interesting, she liked it. She seems like she liked it a lot, but the most interesting takeaway that like I didn't get at all, but I saw it kind of in the response, but like I don't have any experience with this, so maybe that's another reason why the movie didn't work for me. But like she's like, one thing that I thought it really did well was show like what it's like to be a young woman in a situationship.
Interesting. Okay.
Where it's you know,
she's in a situationship with Orlok.
Right. And she's like, and her takeaway, her interpretation of the ending was, you know, I saw it as like just 100%, like, okay, she's choosing to do this for her husband.
Sacrifice, right?
Yeah. But she's like, but there is like, there does seem to be some kind of like genuine romance and like caring for Orlok. And you actually see that very well in the ending of Herzog's Nosferatu, but I didn't see it at all in Eggers. Like it very much felt like, and that was one of like part of what made it feel thin, I think, was just, you know, it was a choice, and that was one of the things that was memorable about it, was how gross and disgusting Nosferatu was. But like you don't get that humanness, you don't get that sense of like longing and like just this immortal being stuck forever haunting the planet. But for whatever reason, and like I don't know, there's a part of me that wants to be like, I don't know what it's like to be a young woman and to not and have like conflicting feelings. And she clearly like has these ideas of, I mean, it's, you know, tale as old in time, like falling for the bad guy, right? Like,
yeah, there's definitely, I mean, that's the thing. It's like him hanging his hat on the female protagonist here changes so much about what's going on. Mm-hmm. I do have to bring up the Richard Brody review, which I've already sort of touched on briefly.
Mm-hmm. Please,
you know, he really calls out like that, like I can't remember exactly what he says. But obviously he calls the initial encounter a rape of a girl, you know, mm-hmm. and so essentially Orlok's a child predator. And then like the ending is her sacrificing herself to her rapist.
Yeah,
you know what? I didn't necessarily like latch onto those aspects of it as he did, but there's definitely some element of that going on where Eggers is trying to get away with this heightened gothic romance happening.
Right.
And there's this quote unquote sacrifice. It just doesn't, I don't know, it in nihilistic or sad endings where there's a sacrifice or somebody dies, there's usually this sort of bittersweet silver lining thing going on. And in this case, is there one? Because she was born into the occult, as sort of Willem Dafoe's character says to her.
Yeah.
And, you know, she was almost, he says something to the point where, I can't remember exactly what it was, but you would have been like a priestess or something in the past, but now you get to sort of save us all. I don't know. She doesn't seem like a hero to me, right?
No,
it doesn't seem
no.
like a heroic act to sacrifice. In the original, with a woman sacrificing, there's so much baggage with that, so much
Right.
misogyny
Yes.
and
Yes.
sexism and, you know, all of that. I don't know. What do you make of Brody's take on it and sort of the sexual politics and gender politics of this ending in this version?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's telling, I think, that in all of the press that Eggers is doing about this, and he has one interesting quote where I was kind of like referring to it earlier as like, where was this? Like, I didn't see this part of that character Ellen in the movie. Let me see if I can find it in my notes here. Oh yeah, he positions Ellen as a young woman whose depressive and otherworldly nature has led her to ostracism among her peers. Quote, she's an outsider. She has this understanding about the shadow side of life that is very deep, but she doesn't have language for that. She's totally misunderstood and no one can see her. Because of this gift in her teenage years, she ends up reaching out to this demon lover, this vampire, who's the one who can connect with that side of her. But then
that sounds like a really interesting story. I want to see that story.
Exactly. I didn't,
Yeah.
and maybe that's part of why like Depp's performance doesn't work for me. And maybe it's part of it's not her fault. It's the script, because like he to literally like be a director and say like this character doesn't have the language for that, but then you're resting the whole performance on this like relatively inexperienced nepo baby. Like,
yeah, I mean, she doesn't. There's not a lot of credits to her name. And
Yeah,
the ones
yeah.
that she does have are not great.
Exactly, the idol.
Yeah,
they're just like I don't know how you make room for that without like trying to do more with your freaking script. Like, I know that he's like some of the dialogue in what is otherwise a relatively sparse film, The Witch. Like, there's
wonderful.
some like, and not only the dialect aspect, but like some of the exchanges, especially focusing on like the gender politics, are really interesting. And obviously, I think there's also somewhat of a divide on like how you read that ending and its own gender and sex politics, right? Of that film, and also not to mention just like the elephant in the room. Like here we are as like two guys trying to understand the sexual politics behind a film that was made by a man that is like,
yeah.
And then Richard Brody's review, who he himself like
is a dude,
right? And there's obviously all these gradations and progress that we've made in so many years, and yet it still very much feels like, I don't know, like what if he had used his clout and interest in this story to like literally like give it to like a young promising, like I would have loved to see like Jennifer Kent's version of Nosferatu, or Nia DaCosta's Nosferatu.
Yeah.
It's like that's one of the things that's like most frustrating about like male auteurs in the year of our Lord 2024 or 25 is like there's still so many of them that are just like riding that wave of like I'm just like just wish fulfillment, and it doesn't feel like anything more than that.
Yeah.
So,
and exactly it, and you can see that in the fact that like he went through the trouble of writing an in-depth female character, but on screen doesn't show her. Right.
Yeah.
All we see is that opening shot of her calling out to Orlok originally, and then we get the reveal to her husband that like, oh, I called out to him, and we're like, oh, okay, that's weird, because we sort of saw that, but it was very confusing in the beginning. And then the entire movie rests on that initial precursor, that initial action that we don't know anything about. Right. Yeah. And it's like, why would you? It's I get why artists sometimes do that. They have this elaborate backstories and just show you the tip of the iceberg, but that is the story. Why does she do that? Why does she call out to him? It's like, what is her motivation? What is she desiring that she has to pay for? Because the tragedy is that she loses her life. Yeah. She has to give up her stuff, but that we don't know what the tragedy is because we don't really know why she did the initial thing. Truly, we don't see it.
Exactly.
So
For
yeah,
vibes. Yeah.
it's all about vibes. I will say this: a couple of notes before we dive into trivia. Nicholas Hoult, not good in this. Just not. He doesn't sell me at all.
It's interesting. Have you seen Juror number 2?
I haven't seen it yet. I really want to.
So like, I had seen that just before I saw Nosferatu.
I don't dislike him as an actor.
No,
by the way.
he's very capable, and I think that's where it's just like, it also is like by shifting the focus, the emphasis from the Jonathan Harker character. I forget what his Hutter is in the original.
Yeah, Thomas Hutter.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So he gives him a first name in this one. It's once again, like, is there enough on the page for him to even work with? Like,
no, there isn't. There's just not. But I will say this: Aaron Taylor Johnson, who I have always hated as an actor in everything, and I point him out, and I'm like, God, is he terrible? Yeah. In this, he actually is phenomenal. He's really good.
That's going a bit.
No, I think he's great. I didn't even recognize him, and I was like, really? Is that who I think it is?
Yeah, no.
Maybe it's like someone who's, I give him a little benefit of the doubt here. It's a period drama, so it's like if you act decently, it comes out okay. Just have a good accent,
and also relative to the other people on screen.
That's true.
What do we think of? We started the podcast out with the cold open of him, but Willem Dafoe, is he phoning it in, or is he bringing? He's
phoning it in. He's phoning it in. He. I love him to death. He's obviously a global treasure of humanity. But he can act weird and out there, and wherein like he's amazing in, was it Poor Things? Is that what that movie's called? Poor Things?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Unbelievable in that as like a total weirdo. Here it doesn't work for me. Doesn't work.
Right.
Yeah. Bill Skarsgård's fun though. I mean, he's a fun guy.
It's okay. I mean, it's quite the choice. I feel like, as much as I wasn't a fanboy over it like you were, I thought he was used interestingly in Barbarian.
Oh, God, that's great. Yeah.
But like, I still don't think we're far enough removed. Like, he's still Pennywise, and just like knowing that's him there, I don't know. I feel like it could have been more effective if it was somebody that hadn't already entrenched himself in a like visually iconic monster.
Yeah, seriously. I will say this: like his voice. There's in some interview that I read last night that like that's actually his voice. There's so not silly. Like any AI or weird. I think they just like cold recorded his voice, and he did that for like months trying to get this weird sort of deep thing.
It's so silly.
And it's like, why? It's just like, why?
I don't know. Oh my gosh. Okay. Are you ready for trivia, Dan?
I am always ready for trivia.
Okay.
I feel like really confident looking at this like list of movies. I feel like I'm going to like crush this.
Okay. Yeah.
I've seen most of these.
That's unfortunate. I was struggling a bit because I think I've seen 1, 2.
Oh wait, maybe I haven't seen all of these.
I've only
seen maybe like
2 of them.
5 of them.
Okay.
Oh God, Firestarter. Oh, it's so bad.
All right. So for our listeners at home, I provided Dan with a graphic of 12 different posters of movies from this decade, the 2020s, that are remakes. And I'm going to give them a clue. Here it is a quote from a critic comparing the remake to the original.
All right, you're making it difficult. I love it.
Let's go. I got to. I thought like
it's too easy to kind of
yeah. Okay. Number 1. Though they share the same plot line, the original is a depth charge, whereas the remake is a surface-to-air missile. One detonates deep down and devastation steadily rises to the surface. The other follows a prescribed trajectory well above ground.
God. Downhill?
Yeah, good one. Nice.
Yeah. Because I just remember the critical response to that one very specifically. It has a terrible cinema score, I want to say, the remake.
Yeah, I have not watched it, but I really love the original. It's based on this
Isn't
Swedish
it
French
written
film,
by? Yeah, I mean, yeah, the
Force
original.
Majeure. It's Ruben Östlund of Triangle of Sadness, which I was not a fan of, but he also made The Square, which is phenomenal.
What's
He's a fascinating guy. But like, yeah, the original Force Majeure that it's based on is hilarious.
What's crazy about this though is that like Downhill, the remake with Will Ferrell and Julie Louis-Dreyfus, it was directed by Nate Faxon and Jim Rash.
Yep.
Who you might not know if you saw them, you would know them. And they're Oscar
Right.
winners. They won the script for The Descendants.
Yep.
They're great writers and great
Yep.
actors too, especially Jim Rash from he played the dean in Community.
Right.
Just a bizarre mishit for them, huh?
Yeah, it's really too bad.
Yeah.
It's like, and you could see what they're trying to do. Like on paper is like, oh yeah, like awkward, like, you know, dark comedy with Will Ferrell.
I couldn't
and
get through
Julia
it. I couldn't get through it.
I
stopped watching it.
I'm never gonna try.
Yeah, I got like a half hour and I was like, no.
All right. I was thinking that you'd get that one wrong, so I followed it up with a bunt. Here you go. The remake tells the story from a completely different perspective, although some characters are familiar. That's all I'm giving you.
Wait, completely different perspective, but all the characters are familiar. I
think that only fits the bill for one of these.
Really? It's not Pinocchio, is it?
Nope.
Roadhouse?
Nope.
What the fuck? He's All That. Nope.
That it would fit that bill, but not with the same characters.
Not the same characters. It must be one of the movies I haven't seen. What is it?
No, it's The Invisible Man.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Which was the last movie I saw before the pandemic. I was in the theater.
Oh my gosh!
It's definitely like one of those memories. I was like, great movie though, great remake.
Yeah, I liked it a lot. It turns, I guess, Wolfman is not turning out.
Yeah, it's what's his name?
Lee Winnell. Yeah,
Winnell. Yeah. He's the Wolfman looks terrible.
Yeah, well, good on him for.
Well, if you haven't seen Invisible Man, go see it. Elizabeth Moss is amazing.
Oh yeah, she is like she should have been nominated for an Oscar.
Her Scientology background taints everything she does, but she's amazing.
Okay, number 3. In comparison, the remake emphasizes the romantic side of the story, giving more weight to it with a far more sexualized portrayal of love and lust.
West Side Story?
Nope.
The Valley Girl?
Nope. Yeah, I don't think either of those are very explicit, whereas this one
Rebecca?
is. Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Yep.
I don't even know what's my film history has spotty.
That's Hitchcock. Hitchcock, 1940.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I mean, I know that.
I feel like I've seen it, but maybe I haven't.
It's one of my favorites of his, and
you know how I am with Hitchcock. I
know.
have such a weird relationship with Hitchcock.
But you can imagine my obsession over especially early Hitchcock, and then finding out that Netflix is remaking it with Armie Hammer. Gross.
He's trying to make a comeback. Anyways, let's keep going.
Go ahead and try to rehabilitate. It's gonna be first time.
It's hard to come back from being a cannibal, but that's all right.
But yeah, we live in unprecedented times, Daniel.
Yeah, we know we do.
Okay. So this should be a lob as well. I think the most striking change came with a song that basically becomes the start of the second act in the new version, sung by a completely new character. It's a lob.
Song.
They invented a
Valley
new
Girl?
character. No.
Roadhouse?
No, the character is singing.
He's All That? Oh, West Side Story.
There you go. So, do you think that you're?
I thought he played that really close to the original, but I guess he didn't.
Oh no, and that was one of the few things he changed. I mean, obviously the cinematography, the aesthetic is completely different, but yeah, he was pretty close to the original script. But the reason for that one pretty drastic change is because he brings Rita Moreno back, and obviously she's not playing a teenager anymore.
Yeah,
So now she plays the shop owner, but she
Yep.
gets to sing the same song that she sang in the original. Yeah, have you seen
Gotcha.
the remake
Of West Side Story?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, multiple
Oh, okay.
times.
Cool. Yeah. All right. I'm a big fan.
It's fantastic. Yeah.
Okay. The last one, I think that puts you. I mean, I kind of gave you. A couple,
I got like the hardest one right.
Yeah. The first one.
My film knowledge is so esoteric and bizarre. Like I know about downhill. Like it just makes no sense.
Right. Okay. I like this one. The only real similarity between the two is that the protagonist in both movies is shown as a very cool person who is nice until they're put in a position where they can't be.
Roadhouse.
Yeah, that's good.
Have you seen the new Roadhouse?
I can't.
Please watch it. Do you like the original?
I do.
The original is one of my favorite movies of the 80s. It's just phenomenal. It's phenomenal. You showed it in class?
Yes.
Oh, we talked about this. That's insane. How can you show? Explain to me this. How can you get away with showing these movies? You showed Uncut Gems in class, didn't you?
You don't put my last name in any of these.
No.
Okay, good. No, I mean it's on my syllabus, and I have like I do a good. I put in a good effort at explaining like here's how we analyze R-rated content from an academic
obviously
point of view.
Like there's like a good reason to show these movies,
right? But the parents sign off on it. I don't have a lot lot of oversight, so I keep all the signed syllabi in my desk in case I ever get called to the carpet.
There you go. But you got to watch the new Roadhouse. It is unwatchable and terrible.
So why would
and has none of the magic and joy in 80s. I don't even know what you call the original why it's so good. It's just phenomenal.
Yeah. I did a fun discussion exercise after we watched Roadhouse in class where I said, no matter what you say, you have to end your comment with, and that's a beautiful thing. And it was a lot of fun to hear people say that, like, we didn't have a single piece of backstory about our main character. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
I love it. All right. So I got what, 2 out of 5?
Yeah. Not bad to start off. We'll see how you do up against our first guest for the season.
Brian's so good. He's got such good. I'm gonna get smoked by Brian. I know it.
Yeah, you might as well just turn the mic off.
What do we got coming up? We got 2010s. We've got True Grit from 2010 and 1969 was the original. 2000s. We've got. This is my choice. Dawn of the Dead. Oh, I'm so excited.
That's
so excited to talk about that. Cape Fear, The Fly, King Kong, Fistful of Dollars. Closing out with the Maltese Falcon. It should be a fun season. It's going to be a good one. Got a lot of great guests coming up. Some repeats. I think some new folks.
Good mix.
It's going to be a great season, guys.
Yeah. Thanks so much for tuning back in to Film Trace, and we'll catch you back to talk about True Grits with Brian from Deep Focus Review.